right, glad to have our next guest. Love to have her. He's been on the show before, so it's kind of like we always say that when people return as guests, it's like Carson bringing someone over the couch, except we are not successful like Johnny Carson. That was a horrible comparison. But the origin story is over. Often with superhero films, the origin story is like you got to introduce the audience to the person, so they have to kind of explain what they're about. His book, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, you can follow him on Twitter. Don't call him Stein. It's Alex Epstein. How are you, sir?
That's actually totally wrong, but
is it? Did I get it? What did I just say? What did I just say?
It's Epstein, but I definitely don't care.
Well, I know, but I was referencing Young Frankenstein. But well, you know, it looks like number 2 is the final visit for Alex Epstein.
It is okay. It's not foolproof, anyways. I've been on this program forever. Still can't explain why I suck.
Yeah. We still can't explain it. Listen, so we wanted to have you on. It was actually a toss-up between you or my father because the Detroit film is coming out. And that's also likely bull excrement, but Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth 2 is out. Now, did you get like a screener of this? Because it seems that you've already seen the film, correct?
Yeah. I used a lot of fossil fuels to get to this movie. Like a lot, because I'm in San Francisco now, which of course I had to use fossil fuels to get there from the DC area where I grew up. But even in the near term, I had to go from San Francisco to LA and back in the same day, which is a miracle of petroleum.
Yes.
In order to see this quote unquote documentary, because I wanted to be able to credibly comment on it in advance, and particularly to write a review of it. So yeah, I'm fully qualified. I managed to finagle my way into a screening full of people who were not wearing I Love Fossil Fuel shirts.
Well, you know what? Listen, it's actually pretty easy. If Al Gore is attending the screening, which I would imagine with a red carpet premiere, just walk up to him wearing open-toed shoes. You're golden. You're into the premiere right away. So let me ask you this. We've had Ann McElhinney on the show specifically because she did Not Evil, Just Wrong, where she went through a few key predictions from An Inconvenient Truth, the first one, that were verifiably false, right? I mean, to the point where it's embarrassing. Where does Al Gore go from there? What can we expect to see in this movie? How does he turn that around?
It's interesting because one of his prominent quote-unquote predictions was that there would be 20-foot sea level rises. Now, he didn't specify the exact timetable, but we were led to believe that it would be several decades. And even if you look at the UN, which I think relies heavily on climate prediction models that can't predict climate, even they say things like 2 feet. Right? So what Gore has this ingenious thing, sort of, where he starts out and he quotes a chorus of people whom he later explains to us are either fools or shills from the fossil fuel industry, and they are ridiculing Gore. And one of the things they say is that, oh, you said sea levels would rise 20 feet. And I perked up and I thought, wow, how is he going to get out of this one? Because they definitely didn't and definitely aren't.
Right.
And what he did is he just brought up this chorus to bring forward this idea that since An Inconvenient Truth, Al Gore has been victimized by fools and shills. That's premise number 1 of the movie, who claim that he overpredicted these things.
Well, first off, even if that were true, it still doesn't answer the 20 feet question, but I'm tracking. Right.
But he's making it seem like he's going to.
Right.
And then he says, then kind of premise 2 as well on the renewables replacing fossil fuels issue. That's totally happening, and he gives a whole bunch of anecdotes, which is distinct from data.
Yes.
He gives a whole bunch of anecdotes allegedly proving that, and then he gives a whole bunch of anecdotes proving climate has gotten worse, but he never quite addresses the 20-foot thing. And then you step back and you think, wait, he never actually proved any of these are trends. He just gave us anecdotes that make us think that the trends exist. And fortunately, professionally, I study the trends, so I know the trends. So I found just incredible. There's not evil, just wrong, but no, it's really evil to manipulate data to make a trend seem like the opposite of what it is. And I can elaborate, but the trends in terms of how vital fossil fuels are and how safe we are from climate are the exact opposite of what this manipulative movie says they are.
1 second, Nakaja's gonna have a heart attack. Why are you laughing so hard?
It's like a really bad episode, or a typical episode of Alaska State Trooper, where a bunch of cool stuff, really cool stuff, almost happens.
Oh, but yeah, you see coming up, and you're like, oh my gosh, you're gonna shoot a grizzly bear. And it's like, whew, thank God we didn't run into a grizzly bear.
Yeah.
Next episode. What did he do? So a few predictions. Obviously, the sea rise. Okay, it doesn't seem like that's answered. What about the catastrophic drought? And then, of course, another one was this proliferation of disease and natural disasters. Did he address any of those specifics? Because, a part of me did think with the first Inconvenient Truth, like, hey, this is kind of ballsy to put out predictions that you can be called on, but not if you just don't actually answer people calling you on it.
I think there's a great lesson in the movie because it feels like he's addressing them, because he gives you anecdotes that, if those anecdotes were generally the case, would vindicate him. And you don't know in the movie that those anecdotes aren't generally the case. So let's just take severe drought or something like that. So he'll show a drought in Syria, then he makes a whole bunch of bogus foreign policy connections. But we'll leave that aside. So what you're led to think is, drought-related deaths are getting worse, right? More people are dying from drought. And this is actually untrue, completely untrue. Drought-related deaths in the last 80 years are down 99.98%.
Yeah.
They're virtually non-existent, thanks to what? Thanks to industrial development that turns, droughts into not a problem.
Yeah.
So this is just a complete misrepresentation. And if we took away everyone's fossil fuels, droughts would become a huge problem again because we would de-develop.
Right. What about like Ebola and Zika? That seems like it's the result of global warming, climate change.
I mean, I talk a little bit about the history of some of these in Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, because they act like, these things have never crossed any borders before. Malaria is a disease of just the cold. And historically, these aren't true. We have records showing people dying of these things all over the place. And guess what? When you have more travel, you're going to have potentially more transferring of these things. So again, your friend is industrial development. That's what keeps us safe. That's what allows us to make progress. So the idea that we should de-energize our society, restrict people's fossil fuels, and then disease will get better, that's the opposite. Disease deaths are on the decline, but only as long as we continue industrial development.
Well, what if they say, okay, we understand that disease is on the decline, or deaths are lowered now because of technology with drought, but it's a ticking time bomb. We can only do this for so long before we run out of resources. Hence, I know Al Gore makes a passionate argument for replacing everything with wind or solar. Now, we've talked about in our program Germany and having to sell off energy at net negative prices because solar is so unreliable, and having energy droughts themselves. But if he says, okay, yeah, technology, the Industrial Revolution has led us out. For example, we have cures for polio. You don't need to worry about tuberculosis. But now we're at a point where we're running out of resources. It seems that he could make that case. Does he?
Well, no, he definitely doesn't make that case. It's interesting with fossil fuels that people have two arguments. One is that we're using too much, and one is that we won't have enough,
right?
Which is a little bit of a contradiction, right? Because nature would take care of the problem if we were running out, and they should be happy. So what you can tell is they're just always finding a way to oppose fossil fuels without any kind of coherent narrative. And right now, because of the amazing technological achievements of the oil and gas industry with shale energy, that whole peak oil narrative is out the window, at least for a decade or two. So now they're just back to,
do you remember peak oil, Jared? A lot of people watching this who are younger don't even know that. That was the term, peak oil. It was a cover of Time. It was on. It was like seemed like every other day there was something on the Nat Geo channel, or Discovery Channel about peak oil.
Remember GOP fear-mongering? GOP fear-mongering.
I haven't heard peak oil in years, Alex.
Yeah. I mean, I was writing about oil when I was ridiculed for believing that peak oil is bogus. And really, if you understand economics, this whole issue of depletion and replacement is just the whole question is, what's the best form of energy right now and in the foreseeable future? And we have this amazing thing called freedom and a market, which allows us to decide that. And then if we start to run low on something, or if the price goes up, then we start to replace it. But Gore is not an advocate of superior replacements, because he's against nuclear power. He's against hydropower. He's against fracking. He's in favor of inferior replacements, the so-called solar and wind renewables, which are properly called unreliables. So he gets no credit for progress.
It's properly called unreliables. It's funny because that just shows us how some issues are politicized, specifically within national borders. An example we used was this idea of suppressors, silencers on guns. Here in the United States, they're opposed by the anti-gun lobbyists because they say, everyone's going to be an assassin, everyone's going to be a Corleone going around killing people and their face falling in spaghetti and meatballs. Whereas in the UK, where they have much more stringent gun laws, it's considered rude in many parts smarts to not hunt with a suppressor. It's funny you mentioned hydropower. I'm from Quebec, a socialist province of Quebec, where there is no conservative, right? There's liberal and liberal separatists. They're on board with every single piece of climate change legislation that exists. Our electric bills, people always said, your hydro bill. I remember when people would visit, they'd say hydro bill, your water bill. We'd say, no, electric, because it's almost all hydroelectric power in Quebec. So I guess I wasn't even aware of this until the last few months. That's been politicized, where that's considered not green enough.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Now, why is that? Because, again, we've been doing that for it seems like it couldn't get more renewable than using the energy of running, falling water.
Right. So the idea of green is to minimize impact on nature.
Sure.
And if you really want to minimize impact on nature, then you really just shouldn't do anything. We should have never built New York City. You should never have a child. And
many socialist warriors excel in this part.
Yes.
And, North Korea is a much better country than South Korea because they've done very little impacting of nature.
Well,
so
they haven't created any blowing up phones, so I'll give that's one for North Korea.
So if you look at, you made me lose my train of thought.
Hydro. We were talking about hydro.
Yeah. If you look at hydro, they'll say, well, look, we can't dam a river. And then they look at nuclear. We can't split an atom. And you say, wait a second. Isn't CO2 supposed to be the catastrophe of the century? You're not willing to dam a river to stave off the catastrophe of the century? You're not willing to risk a meltdown to stave off the... And what you find is that, no, because the environmentalism has only supported one form of energy in its entire history, and that is imaginary energy. They only support sources that don't work as long as they don't work, because every source of energy has a major impact. So as soon as solar becomes practical, they'll say, oh my gosh, it's destroying our countryside. We can't allow that.
Yeah. Well, that's also a great point to even think about, again, because hydropower was electric power where we were in Quebec, particularly in the South Shore of Montreal. It's a great indicator of if we did have these catastrophic floods, a 20-level sea rise, that they're not going to come to humans' aid. It's like, hey, there's a sea rise. Can we dam this? No. Yeah. No, there's rainbow trout in there. What are you, out of your mind? Get the hell out of here. All right. Okay, Alex, we have to get going. We'll have you back. Hopefully, we'll see if there's some fallout. Honestly, I haven't really seen a whole lot of buzz for an Inconvenient Truth.
So do not watch it. By the way, the people who were screening it said, they asked Al Gore how they could help. He said, screen my movie, which isn't really, but because we want as many people to watch it as possible. So please do not watch it. It's a really bad movie by a bad person. I won't say pirate it, but that's one thing you can do to help the world.
I've heard you haven't seen it because the promotional material and budget really has gone into 2031 when they're releasing Inconvenient Truth 3.
Yes,
so
exactly.
That's probably why we haven't seen much.
Yeah, and he's spending a lot of time on the board at Apple. Al Gore his interests are split these days. All right, Alex Epstein, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. You can read it. You can find it. I highly recommend it. Sharp man. Alex, we'll have to have you back soon with some follow-up on this.
All right, good to be here. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you, brother. We'll be back.